help us to understand, how do you see her speech today, which of course is one of those speeches in her political life. She could lay it out what she has been thinking about. Let's go from Ms. Goldenberg first.
Thank you. Great to be here. Well, this was Hillary Clinton's big moment, and I would say it was a good, solid speech, but I would have to look at it in the context of the convention as a whole. And that's where it gets much stronger, because what you see is the Democrats putting out a message that in some ways sort of hijacks Republicans' traditional terrain. There was talk about God, there was talk about country and patriotism, and there was talk about change. So she's trying to sort of be all things to all people, and she's also trying to push very hard on the idea that Donald Trump is just not acceptable.
I see.
That he just is beyond the pale when it comes to U.S. politics. So there's a lot of messages in there, but it boils down to, you know, the campaign slogan in a way, which is stronger together.
Right. Ms. Schwartz, we've been talking for a lot of times. What do you think about this speech? Is she strong in her points?
Well, I was in the arena last night, and to that arena crowd, which are Democrats, it was huge. The applause, the chants, the cheers, it was enormous. And looking at today's news coverage from around not only America, but the world, it was very well received. Not only was she able to humanize herself as a mother and a grandmother from the introduction from her daughter, Chelsea Clinton, but she was able to discuss policy. She was able to take very well calculated jabs at her opponent with a smile. And I think that really set her up of what she wants these next 100 days to be about. Personality as well as policy.
What about you, Mr. Andrews, as a gentleman and of course as someone from the other party?
Yeah, so whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think every American recognizes the historic moment that happened last night. I think one thing that was very evident to me was that Hillary Clinton spent some time protecting her left flank. Some of the news stations interviewed Bernie Sanders supporters last night, and they said that there's not going to be any honeymoon for Hillary Clinton, that they're going to continue to push hard from the left for her to do some more progressive things. And so as she goes through Pennsylvania and Ohio over the weekend with her vice presidential candidate, Tim Kaine, I think it's going to be interesting to see, can she balance protecting that left flank and keeping those Sanders supporters there with broadening her approach and reaching out to a more independent and a more moderate audience that she'll need to do if she's going to win in November.
Right. Certainly, for those of us who have watched the speech, it is not supposed to be a rhetorical masterpiece, but rather very pragmatic approach coming from her, laid out where she comes from, trying to deal with the trust issue, and also many of the policies she's supposed to embrace. Having said that though, Ms. Schwartz, trust issue is a big issue for Secretary Clinton. We've seen her polls, even over the past few weeks, not necessarily doing very well. So is she really dealing with this issue? Will she telling people, have faith in my leadership, really going to help?
I really believe she put a lot of that to rest last night by calling out the contrast between she and Donald Trump. As for the Bernie Sanders supporters that Brendan just mentioned, she has created the most progressive Democratic platform in its history. And if there is a small minority of Bernie supporters that won't get on her bandwagon, I think she more than makes that up with other voter groups. I really believe that now, I mean, we don't have polls out from last night yet. Right now, Donald Trump is up 0.9% in the average of polls as of last week after the RNC. Today, there are some polls that have her up as much as 9 points, but we are still far out from the general election. She and Tim Kaine, her vice presidential nominee, are getting on a bus trip. They're going through the heartland, and they know that this is not where they've culminated their platform. This is where they've kicked it off. Now they've got a very tough and stringent 100 days in front of them, and they are going to use every ounce of energy and policy for that.
They do have a tough time over ahead. Mrs. Goldberg, and therefore I want to go to you. What about that, this honesty issue for Mrs. Clinton? I mean, she's still got a lot of issues on her shoulder, including Benghazi, including the email problems, and also the issues with the DNC. The latter was trying to support her, but not necessarily in a very smart way, of course. So these issues have not been 100% cleared, at least according to the other party. What do you think these will be, how heavy the burden for her?
I think it's really a huge obstacle.
Can I just mention they have been cleared?
We'll go to you a bit later. I can tell, Ms. Schwartz, you are the cheerleader for Mrs. Clinton, but let's go to Ms. Goldenberg first.
But no, I'm stating facts.
Right,
Ms.
the perception issue is huge, and I think it's undeniable.
Go ahead, Ms. Goldenberg.
I think it's undeniable that Hillary Clinton has very high unfavorable ratings. And that is perception, but this election is about perception. And she is finding it very hard to make traction with voters because of the perception that she can't be trusted. And I think this is incredible when you consider the alternative, which is Donald Trump. And yet, you hear, you see from the polls that Hillary Clinton is having trouble connecting with married, white, suburban women. That's a big focus for the campaign. They should be natural Clinton supporters, but I think the trust issue comes into play there. The other one, which is astonishing to me, is the idea among younger voters, younger women, that there's some equivalence between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and that they're both equally bad. And so I think the perception that she can't be trusted is huge and will make her have to really fight hard in this election, where a lot of people might think it's an obvious choice, that she is the safe choice.
Ms. Broussard, let's just say it is perception. Let's just say it is perception.
Yeah.
Because we need to have a lot of investigation about all the facts in order to reach a conclusion about many of the issues that we just mentioned. But let's say it's just a perception issue. Is the perception issue unique to female leaders? Because you're coming from the UN Women. You do a lot with women leadership. Is it something related to her? Is that unique to female leaders, or this is something just following her personal stories?
Unfortunately, I think it's something that hits women harder than it hits men.
Why would you say so?
Overcoming perception issues, because unfairly, they're judged according to their gender, and their gender is at a disadvantage when it comes to being selected for a leadership position. So in the case of Hillary, I think the fact that she is a woman is a sort of a lingering sense of, can she be trusted? I think that's part of the equation. However, it's not the only aspect. She mentioned, Barbara mentioned white, suburban, married women. And Suzanne. I'll give my mother as an example. She's from the Midwest, and so she's a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, very ardent Republican, has been for many years, but she hates Trump. She hates Trump. But she is very unwilling to vote for Hillary because she doesn't fully trust Hillary.
Where does that come from?
I think it comes from, Hillary has a very political background. She's a very political creature. And not everybody likes that in their leaders.
Very interesting point over there. Let me go to you, Mr. Andrews. Of course, coming from a gentleman's perspective, what about that? I mean, she is being described by some as very, in a way, very flexible in the politics. Some describe that as smart because she could always catch up with the time and the attention of the people. For example, being a hawkish, even Democrat after September the 11th, but at the same time later work on different other issues, LGBT and also human rights. That's another side of her. And some describe her as very cunning in a way, and therefore not trustworthy. What do you think about political leadership? Is it part of their job, or What about female leaders when it comes to being quote unquote cunning?
Well, I have a history with Hillary Clinton. Her office was actually right down the hall from my office when I worked in the United States Senate. We were there on the 4th floor of the Russell Senate Office Building. She actually served on the Armed Services Committee along with my boss at the time, Senator Inhofe. And you're absolutely correct. At that time, in terms for being a Democrat, she was certainly very hawkish and very focused on national security, even before 9/11, but especially after 9/11. I think there's a couple of things here with Hillary Clinton. One, there's an overall distrust of politicians in the United States of America at this point. The populist movements that we've seen from the Tea Party to, again, the more liberal wing of the Democratic Party with the Bernie Sanders folks, there's a distrust of government. And I think you take a figure like Hillary Clinton, who has been in the public eye for most of her life, and then you add on the fact that she's a politician, and then you add on the fact that there's this overall distrust of government in the United States, and it's kind of a perfect storm in terms of pushing her favorability ratings down. And I think she's been able to handle the first two issues, so Benghazi and her personal email scandal, fairly well. This DNC issue, though, doesn't end with Debbie Wasserman Schultz leaving the DNC. There's still staff there, there's still processes there that haven't been right for some time. And so she's going to have to spend some time figuring out how to fix that, because one of the
we understand why it is important.
Presidential nominee is to raise money.
Yes, indeed. We understand why it is very important. Let me go to you, Ms. Schwartz. I know you've been waiting. It's only fair share that I gave you an opportunity to talk about this, Ms. Schwartz. What do you say about this trust issue vis-a-vis female leaders? And how do you see her rise as a female leader in American politics? Does she have to act as man, quote unquote, in order to be where she is, including being cunning, being so-called flexible?
That is such a unique and interesting question, Tian, because last night when we saw her discuss Donald Trump and take some pretty good jabs at Donald Trump in her convention speech, she did it with a smile. And I think it's going to be how she attacks him, the way she delivers the attacks, that will determine whether or not she's seen as cunning or she's seen as smart. There's a very fine line, and I think going forward, they're going to continue the tempo that she set that night. Your vice presidential nominee, the candidate for the party, he's the one that has a little bit more leeway to go harder, to be that attack dog. It's more of a traditional measure. Now, he is a man on the ticket, but I really believe that how she did it last night is how they want her to continue doing it for the next 100 days.
Right. Whether this is going to be shaped as a woman versus a man in terms of the competition for the White House is still a big question mark. At this moment, we do see some differences between these two. As we mentioned earlier, the supporting rate for Mrs. Clinton is not necessarily satisfying, at least to her. According to a Reuters IP opinion poll released recently on Tuesday, 39% likely voters supported Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump, 37% supported his Democratic rival Hillary Clinton, 24% would vote for neither. Of course, this number we have here could have some marginal differences compared to the other polls. Polls are never 100% accurate. And yet, Ms. Broussard, do you think this will be the beginning of more women coming into the political leadership? Is this likely to be really the springboard, as Mrs. Clinton claimed in her speech, for women leaders to rise just as she has done?
I wouldn't call it a beginning. I'd call it the middle of the next stage of development.
Well, you're coming from UN Women. I'm sure you're going to say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you look at global trends, the UN likes our statistics. And one statistic we like to use is the percentage of women in the lower house of parliament compared across different countries.
Give us the number.
Okay, so in 1997, just 19 years ago, across all the lower houses of parliament in the world, there was just 12% of them were women members. And as of this year, 2016, it's 22.8%. So it has almost doubled in just 19 years. There's a very clear upward trend. And so is Hillary the next stage? I mean, is she the start, or is she part of the end in the next stage? I would say she's benefited from an overall growth that's going on around the world. And I do believe that she will be a symbol that will have a big effect not only on women and girls in the United States, but women and girls around the world.
Well, being the symbol, then that would mean the person would have a lot of pressure to act good and right. Ms. Goldenberg, we see leadership around the world. This is almost the generation in a way. The UK, Germany, in here you have in Asia, South Korea, and earlier in Pakistan, in India, now in the United States, possibly even the UN Secretary General. There are many on the short list for that, women. So is this really the vow generation we are going to have for female leaders around the world? What kind of role is Mrs. Clinton likely to play in that regard?
Well, I would love to see that, and I think symbols are really important. I think, you know, and that's something that Hillary Clinton said herself in her speech, you know, if you can't see something, or maybe it was Chelsea, sorry, if you can't see something, you can't be something. I think it's really important for younger generations of women and girls to see women in power. I think it's also important to look at the entry points for getting into politics. And this, you know, in the American context, certainly is a big barrier that women aren't getting the encouragement they need to run for office, and they aren't getting the support they need to run for office, so they don't get into this sort of beginning point for sort of a political career that would take them to these upper levels that you're talking about. So you do still need a lot of work on the lower levels to get women into politics at the beginning and to support the rise through the ranks to higher offices.
Right. Ms. Schwartz, what do you think? Is this likely to be really the trend? Will there be following up generations, much more of them in numbers?
I do believe so, and I agree with what was just said. I think Hillary really sets a bar, but she acknowledged that there were many that set the bar before her. But now when you're looking at local elected officials and statewide elected officials and our governmental elected officials, there is a really wonderful group here in the United States who's been incredibly helpful for Hillary Clinton and other women members of Congress, as well as states and on the mayoral level as well, called Emily's List. And they are there to help with research, data, fundraising, information, so that these women entering politics, no matter what their background, are prepared. Hillary herself has had 40 years up until now, but I think it's these organizations that set up women to succeed, like Emily's List, for example, are those that will grow because of this.
But Ms. Broussard, let's just be frank here. 240 years of American political history. This is the very first time women likely to make it to the White House, being the #1. We still don't know yet that far. So what do you think? How long will it take for us to reach the next stage? It's very hard to predict, but I think you and women, you got numbers.
When you reach a threshold of 30%, things start to change. But I wanted to mention a story that I've heard from 3 different countries.
Briefly, if you can.
Okay. Friends from Finland, Norway, and Iceland, all of whom have had long-serving women prime ministers. I've heard the same story, and that is a young boy, having grown up under that female leadership, says to his mother, "Mom, when I grow up, can I be prime minister someday?"
All right. Well, that could be a great choice to be the #2 for the boys as well. And talking about the boys, we have to let the gentlemen speak. It's only fair that we have gender equity in this conversation. Unfortunately, we've only got 30 seconds to go. Mr. Andrews, your final comments. Is that likely to be an interesting political trend?
Yeah, we absolutely need more women in politics. I think there's an organization called Catalyst that works with Rutgers University, and they'll tell you that only 20% of the elected members to the United States Congress are currently women. That's an upward trend. Unfortunately, only about a quarter of the elected officials nationwide are women, and so we definitely need the elected representatives in our country to look like and to have the same life experience as the folks that they're representing. And so this moment, you know, going from Shirley Chisholm, who was an African-American woman, the first woman to actually run for president of the United States, to Hillary Clinton accepting the nomination is a good thing, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or otherwise.